Welcome to yet another episode of Worldview with Swasti, a special series that we are doing in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor. So, one of the key things that we need to devise in time is a broader strategy for countering terrorism, because essentially the problem that we face from Pakistan is that of terrorism. And you may have noticed that the terrorists that attacked us in Pahalgam have also been alleged to have some footprint from other transnational terrorist groups. Now, you may be hearing a lot about Jaish-e-Mohammed or Lashkar-e-Taiba, etc., and the different outfits that spring from there. But what really is the impact of the bigger transnational terrorist groups on those terrorists that infiltrated that hideous attack on us in Pahalgam on 22nd April? And for unpacking that, I have just the right person. Well, very pleased to welcome you, Kabir.
Thank you
I
so
have
much.
Kabir Taneja, who is a deputy director and a fellow at the ORF. He specializes in the Middle Eastern region as well as on terrorism. So he's just the right person for us to unpack this mystery. So, Kabir, starting from the very basic thing, India saw an unprecedented attack on 22nd of April. And you may have heard a lot of things about this larger footprint. Is there a larger jihadi slash mujahideen slash transnational terror group's footprint on what happened in Pahalgam?
Thanks, Swasti. Look, on the onset of things, we are very clear that what happened in Pahalgam was a construct of the old Pakistani terror groups that we all know. So that is Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Yeah.
But look, Pakistan is riddled and is sort of like the fulcrum of a lot of jihadist organizations now. Let's not forget that after a decade-long search, or more than a decade-long search, the United States ultimately found Osama bin Laden in a very fancy compound, not in Bhavalpur or not in one of these ideological places where we think, there are these madrasas in rural Pakistan where they are radicalizing youth and so on and so forth. All that happens. But Osama bin Laden was found in Abbottabad, which is not far from where most of the Pakistani military establishment lives and operates from. So, it's very difficult to sort of ascertain and at the end of the day where or what kind of linkages these groups have developed with, let's say, Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State and so on and so forth. But the fact remains that Pakistan offers a lot of space for these groups, right? We have seen, for example, the US has been running an anti-ISIS program called Operation Inherent Resolve in Syria and Iraq for a long period of time now. So they've gotten rid of Baghdadi and the subsequent leaders that were elected. But none of those kind of operations are possible or happening in Pakistan, right? So Pakistan is sort of this haven or safe haven for a lot of these establishments. We also saw Al-Qaeda and Islamic State come out with a long statement.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask you about that. Yes.
Yeah.
So what is the purpose of, what is the relevance? I mean, how should we in India be reading it?
Look, Al-Qaeda has been active in this part of the world for a long period of time. Now, the problem here is that Al-Qaeda, specifically in the Indian subcontinental area, is not known for its operations, right? So, it's not known to conduct attacks. It's not known to sort of push forward militants or terrorists taking on attacks. What they use this region for is other avenues. One of the predominant ones is raising funds. Right, or washing funds. That means how the money is moving between various organizations and various people of that organization.
Right.
Hawala system has been used by a lot of these groups for a long period of time, specifically between entities in the Middle East and Pakistan or Bangladesh and India. So it's the Al-Qaeda statement was interestingly very similar in language and tone to what we hear from the Pakistani establishment, right? They call for interesting terms are used like Bhagwa for India, right? Basically putting that communal and religious tenor which Asim Munir, the chief of Pakistan Army, did a couple of weeks before Pahalgam took place. So you can see these small sort of intricate highways connecting everything to the broader framework of what the war is about for them. Right. But even for Lashkar-e-Taiba, for example, we've had conversations with the Taliban where India has explicitly said that we want to make sure that Afghanistan does not become this strategic depth for these kind of groups. So, all these linkages very, very much exist. The thing with Pakistan is that no one over decades has seen it as problematic as it is. Unfortunately, I don't see that changing either in the immediate future. In the long term, let's see what happens.
No, I'm glad you made that point, because I think every single analysis that has come out of a post-Pahalgam scenario for us has actually, underscored these things, that a strike is to give a signal, it's a posturing. But the strikes, I mean, this is with regard to Operation Sindoor or any other strikes that, we did Balakot earlier, etc. This is going to buy us time. This is going to perhaps, raise the stakes for them a little bit, but this is not going to cure this madness that is kind of, possess the minds of these people that perpetrates terror attacks. But before I come and sort of open it up and ask you about the ISIS, Khorasan, etc., etc., I also want to ask you a little bit about, because you mentioned one statement. You said that Al-Qaeda put out a statement which was, like this. But we had another statement coming a few days later after the Operation Sindoor was launched, which was actually released by the Taliban Foreign Ministry, which asked both sides to de-escalate tensions, etc. Now, I'm asking this in particular reference because we know that the Taliban today, I mean, the Taliban controlled Afghanistan and Pakistan don't get along over the Pashtun problem. There's a question of TPP there. Then why do you think, how do you then we should be reading this statement? Because they wanted to de-escalate. Wouldn't they want to finish?
No, look, it's a very interesting question, and it's a weird dichotomy that the Taliban deals with it itself, right? If you see how the Taliban started, whether it's the Mujahideen movement that took on the Soviets starting the late 70s, 79 onwards, that was all ideological in nature, right? That was sort of moving forward, taking certain ideas and ideologues in with you. The politics part of it came much later. It was a militant movement at that point of time that was using ideology and religion to push back against communism at that point of time, and by association the Soviet Union, right? So it was a utilitarian design even for the Americans who supported and the Pakistanis who provided.
That's the dirty job that Pakistanis have been doing for the Americans.
But which is interesting, because that's what the defense minister said, that it is a dirty job.
I'm paraphrasing.
No one forced them to do it. You have to remember that. It's a decision they took themselves. So, today in 2025, after the Taliban took over Kabul in 2021, the US signed a deal with them in Doha, and the US left Afghanistan after fighting for 20 years. There is the dichotomy that the Taliban is stuck in, is that it's still an ideological movement, but now responsible for a state, right? So there are these sort of decisions, very geopolitical led decisions that they have to sort of decide on when moving forward. I think the Taliban know at this point of time in Afghanistan, they cannot afford to become home to a India-Pakistan rivalry again, right? One of the real reasons why the Pakistanis were so hell-bent and involved in Afghanistan, in Kabul for a long period of time, that means supporting the Taliban, especially Haqqani Network and so on, is because they did not want India to have a big footprint there, right? That was a core concern, which is why we saw the ISI chief land in Kabul only a few days after the Americans left to sort of stake claim, right? A very visual stake claim. But the Taliban are also not stupid, right?
Of course.
Militant groups do have a lot of thought process behind them, and they do take calculated decisions, obviously. But when this sort of narrative started building in Kabul that now it's a Pakistani fiefdom back, because the Taliban is back in power.
Right.
The Taliban pushed back. They did not want to be identified as a fiefdom. Right? They wanted a certain level of individuality to it, which is why they were very keen from the onset to have some sort of relationship with India, right? Because they realize India is the big power in the region. If they want some sort of peace, tranquility, and make sure that their power is not dislodged, they can't do it without having an outreach to India.
I mean, that's very clear, because I mean, looking at them, they have been having their own outreaches to China, to Russia. I mean, it's like everybody is there, to the Americans, of course. So, I understand where that.
Autonomous.
Yeah, they're strategically autonomous, in that sense. But I'd also sort of, before I come to more groups, there was also some report, if I'm not wrong, on a Hamas link. because there was some, you obviously have to tell me more about it, but then, and it also comes in the aftermath of what happened in the Middle East. I mean, generally, what happened in Syria, what happened in the Middle East, how the Israelis have gone after Hamas, and all that. So it's very fresh in the Indian mind. And obviously, there is so much conspiracy theory around it that it's very difficult to then actually distillate what is important from what is faff. So I think you are the perfect person to do it.
Look, on the Hamas thing, I think everyone saw the reports. So there were clearly, I think there was some rally somewhere in Pakistan where a Hamas representative ended up. I think the person in question was a Hamas member or representative based out of Iran, so not necessarily coming from Gaza itself. And of course, I think if you go back to some of these ideations, for example, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, one of the first people to congratulate the Taliban was Hamas. So Hamas sees what the Taliban did in Afghanistan as a blueprint, that it is possible to dislodge great powers if you are persistent. And resolute in your ideology and in your theology, right? So I think they do see that supporting these kind of activities is beneficial to them. And I think if you see some of the Hamas old literature, not new, but much like most areas where they see sort of Muslim repression and so on and so forth, they tend to have a political supportive stance to it. And I don't think that's too different to the issue in Kashmir also. But having said that, we also have to remember that Hamas has a political arm to it. It's not like the Indians in historically have not reached out to that arm either, so when we see these kind of videos coming up, it's basically, as you say, great opportunity at that point of time for these people to rally support for themselves. But Hamas doesn't have intricate, as far as I know, either leverage or presence in Pakistan beyond a point. But they are supported by Iran, which is a neighbor to Pakistan. So, which is why we saw some of these activities taking place.
So it has a different kind of a flavor and tone and tenor there. But there's also something called the ISKP, which is the ISIS Khorasan, right? And that also has a fairly complex, I would say, positionality. So first of all, I mean, you have to first tell what is ISIS Khorasan, and then how do we link? Are there any interlinkages, or are we just overreading the situation?
Look, ISIS Khorasan is a very, very shadowy organization, right? From the onset, because it was born in this region where there are so many actors at play, no one was really sure who they are, what's like, where do they belong within this sort of region, and where are they coming from. So basically, very quickly, ISKP, Islamic State Khorasan, is a product of basically a lot of Pashtuns being pushed across the Durand line from Pakistan into Afghanistan. They had a operation called Zarb-e-Zab, I think, in couple of years back. So a lot of people that were pushed into Afghanistan ultimately settled into Pashtun villages as refugees. And a lot of ISKP basically formulated there with a very anti-Pakistan viewpoint. But initially, there were a couple of ideologues, including from Central Asia, that built this brand. And you have to remember, at that point of time, this is maybe 15, 16, somewhere there. And the Islamic State was the biggest jihadist brand in the world, right? So the easiest way to cut through the clutter of building both patronage, raising money, as a jihadist group at that point of time was to align yourself with Islamic State, because as soon as you do that, the spotlight comes on you, which they did. So
it is the shortest route to stardom. No, I mean, to popularity.
That's very well put, and that's what happened. Right. But there are also reports, if you go back, there are some authors who have done work such as Antonio Giustozzi, which some people also contest of how good or how accurate his reporting, his research was. But he's done that research.
We'll put a link in the description box so the readers can read that.
Where the argument is that actually the Pakistani intelligence broke into ISKP very early in its formulation. Right. So it created camps within ISKP itself as well. Sort of arming one warlord against the other and so on and so, which is not difficult to do in that part of the world. But the ISKP has a fairly anti-Pakistan tint to it. They don't see the Pakistani state as true representation of either the Muslims or Islam. in Pakistan. So technically, inherently, it's quite it's perceived threat for the Pakistani state. But interestingly, it has also sort of moved beyond the Durand Line area. It's a threat to the Taliban as well.
Right.
So the Taliban actively fights ISKP in the northern parts of its country. It also derives a lot of its cadre from Central Asia.
Okay.
So there are a lot of Tajiks, there are a lot of Uzbeks, and so on and so forth. They claimed a big attack in Russia not too long ago.
Yes.
So that was ISKP.
Yeah.
So they have these transnational tendencies, ideas, and so on and so forth. But this is the perfect ground for them to fester in.
Yeah.
Right, because everything is available. Money is available, weapons are available, ideology is available in plenty. So ISKP is actually very, very individualistic in its nature. It's against the Taliban, it's against the Pakistani state, it's against India, it's against most Central Asian states. It has this sort of very old school Ummah-based ideology, which it says that the Al-Qaeda has failed to deliver on.
Okay.
It says that Al-Qaeda is too involved in the politics of things,
right.
While we are only looking at the Muslim population and support of the Muslim population.
So if I can just paraphrase, I can say ISKP is the only one जिन्होंने अभी अपना मकसद नहीं भूला है.
Exactly. I mean, according to them, right? So that actually puts them on a moral pedestal, if nothing else.
Yeah.
But because they are in a very heavily armed area, developing yourself to a certain level is not easy. The Pakistani state will fight you, the Taliban is fighting you.
Yeah.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, for example, if the Taliban is fighting you, it's utilitarian for the others. Others are like, if the Taliban wants to take them on and decimate them, Taliban at this point of time is not as bad an enemy as the ISKP is.
Right.
So if they are fighting the ISKP, great for everyone at this point of time. Right?
And just to sort of also make the viewers understand, because this is fairly complex.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the groups that we have discussed until now, whether it's Jaish-e-Mohammed or Lashkar-e-Taiba, Al-Qaeda, we discussed Hamas and also ISKP. These are largely Sunni, Wahhabi, those groups, right?
Yeah.
We have not yet come to Hezbollahs and
exactly.
others that are primarily
Exactly.
Shia. So I think you'd like to talk a little bit about that?
I mean, look, what the kind of sort of groups that we associate with Iran, for example, are very different in nature, right? Hezbollah is attached at the hip with the Iranian idea of things. But Hezbollah is very different. Hezbollah has fought elections in Lebanon. Hezbollah has representation in parliament, right? Now, if you see the propaganda of Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, they don't believe in democracy. That they don't believe in democratic practice. So as soon as Hezbollah did elections, they were not supportive of that group at all. Right? They said, you've sold out, you are politically inclined. It's not about Islam, it's not about Muslims. You just want political power. Right? So their ideation is very different. And the same sort of pushback also now comes to the Taliban. Right? They said, you started off as the Mujahideen or somewhere near the ecosystem of Mujahideen. Then you came and fought the Americans for 20 years. But now you're not taking on the Pakistani state. You're not thinking beyond Afghanistan and so on and so forth. So if you go back and see the original propaganda literature that the Taliban has from the 90s and the early 2000s, that, it takes the entire region as part of its larger aims as far as religion is concerned and theological aims are concerned. But now that they are very state oriented, there is so the Islamic State already calls them kafirs.
Yes, of course.
Because the Islamic State has the same agenda what the young Taliban had at a point of time. So, it evolves like that.
Yeah. And before I, of course, kind of segue into what kind of a broader strategy should we be developing, I have to ask you this question on what is then the footprint of all these groups, on a very radically changed Bangladesh? Because we also keep worrying about the radical Islamic footprint on Bangladesh after Sheikh Hasina fell.
I mean, look, Bangladesh is something that is fast evolving at this point of time. But, we know that what kind of activities have taken place there. Bangladesh is also one of the regions where for a long period of time, Al-Qaeda has had a significant footprint. But again, not necessarily for operations, but for various other activities, whether it's drumming up support. And specifically, more than support, it's about finances. Look, none of these actors can survive without finances. They need to move money, they need to move funds. We have seen Islamic State was one of the first organizations that started to utilize crypto, for example. Right? Because if you are sort of taking them out of the traditional financial ecosystems, then they will start looking at alternatives. So for a long period of time, if you were sort of going after Al-Qaeda financial ecosystem, you would target the Hawala systems and so on and so forth.
Right.
Crypto and all is unregulated space. So we don't know how that is going to work out. But on ground, considering Jamaat Islami is such a big factor there, groups like Al-Qaeda find favor more than the Islamic State, in my opinion.
Okay.
Because Al-Qaeda is still seen as more institutionalized rather than Islamic State. Islamic State is a lot of do it yourself, right?
Okay.
If you want to go attack XYZ, you do it, and we will sort of popularize it for you, but that's about it. Al-Qaeda is much more long-term gaming, right? Like, for example, after Zawahiri was assassinated in Kabul by the US, we still don't know who the head is.
Okay.
But there's someone running the show, right? So they play a much longer game. The Islamic State is a bit more sort of, do things very quickly with a loud bang, and then see sort of how it happens and how it goes, which is also a popular method of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, that's very helpful. And also, I mean, now that if I sort of bring it back to us, if I kind of circle back to us, now India has been a victim of terror for many decades.
Yes.
Okay. From our side, we have tried to devise plenty of strategies in different ways. One of the things that has been criticized is the Dossier diplomacy that we have had. Speak to me a little bit about that before I ask you more questions.
Look, for a long period of time, we have to understand that global movement to counter terror was only there because after 9/11, the US decided to put all its military and political might into it. Right. So they mobilized not just their warships, they mobilized laws, they mobilized multilateral systems. And it was a one-point agenda after 9/11 that we have to diminish and destroy Al-Qaeda.
Right.
And on that wave, everyone tried to ride that, okay, everyone had their own concerns on terrorism. Now, where we lost out is that Pakistan became an ally of that war on terror. A critical ally.
Pakistan started building this legitimacy that they are the ones that are at the forefront of terrorism.
Absolutely. And they basically marketed themselves that if the Americans want to go after Al-Qaeda or the Taliban in Afghanistan, they can't do it without us. And there was a level of truth to it, right? The Central Asian states were not very keen on hosting the Americans beyond a point, and the other side is Iran, which is obviously not an option. So the Pakistanis, I mean, if you go back to some of Pakistani foreign minister statements, where they are very clearly asked, much after 9/11, sort of, what is your role now? Now that the US really doesn't care about Pakistan, and they said, look at our geography. If they are not here right now, they'll come back.
Okay.
Right. So ultimately, they ended up being in that position to play the entire system to their own benefit. This is when India's Dossier diplomacy was happening. Where India was repeatedly saying that, look, they are the ones sponsoring terror against us. Right? But it fell on deaf ears. Why? Because specifically the Western powers, NATO, US, were concentrating on the utility of Pakistan. On what they wanted to do in Afghanistan. Once that didn't happen, once they left Afghanistan in 2021, now, you can see sort of those kind of completely sort of, if you see the US statement now, has only come after a threshold was crossed.
Correct.
Before that, President Donald Trump said, look, these guys have been fighting for too long. I don't really want to get into it. So clearly, as some of the reporting in the US media said that such intel came to the forefront that they had to sort of step in. So, only after threshold was breached, I think the Americans sort of came into this fray. But that sort of works for the Pakistanis because they've always said that we want third-party mediation to come into play.
I mean, the very reason that they're still being able to get the bailouts and all the help so-called, and the reason that despite India's, diplomatic footprint and heft in the world at large, a lot of our partners, including whether it was the United States or Russia or the EU or whoever, everybody expressed solidarity with India, condemned the terror attacks, but they did not.
But who mobilized against Pakistan?
Nobody visibly linked it to Pakistan. That itself shows.
In fact, a lot of the questions were asked that what is the proof?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Which is what the Dossier diplomacy was.
Yeah.
To repeatedly give the proof. But
Yeah.
now that we clearly figured out that's not working.
That's not working. Yes.
Then the other options are the options that we see mobilized now. So, the international community cannot come and say that, oh, you have to take sort of the peaceful path towards it. That was done. And 26/11 was a much bigger event than what Pahalgam was, right? Every terror attack is a big thing. But 26/11 was at the heart of Mumbai and multiple, like hundreds killed.
Yes.
So, if that hasn't worked, then the only other option is this option to mobilize. And unfortunately or fortunately, that's what we are saying.
I mean, frankly, if you also read the mood among the Indian population and generally, this is the new normal. And I think we should really welcome this new normal, that if you cross that threshold, you are going to get it back. So I think, yes, of course, we will evolve the strategy over a period of time. So nobody can get it perfect, the right, in the very beginning, as we were just mentioning. But it does tell that India's sort of so far, or you could say, like until now, hitherto, this linear approach to tackling the problem has not really worked. And that's how we were pushed to the corner of doing what we did. Okay. And it was successful.
It was successful, yes. And it was successful because we, raised the bar that, look, at the end of the day, what we did, there was almost a not quasi, but there was sort of a theoretical change of how India is going to approach this now.
Right.
Where India has said, look, now any terror attack of any scale, I'm presuming, will be seen as an act of war. And they showed that what the response is going to be. That the fact that the response will be very conventional in its nature and warlike. It's not going to be a counter-terror sort of movement. Now, the bigger question is, does that install long-term deterrence?
Deterrence, yes.
Will that force Pakistan to change course? I don't know. It's unlikely. That also means that India needs a prolonged long-term Pakistan strategy on how to change things or influence things internally also, right? If both these parameters work together, then yes, I think there can be possibilities, considering the Pakistani economy is non-existent almost. And India is sort of hoping to cross 10 trillion at some point of time. You will come at that space in a couple of years where the Indian sort of position is going to become even stronger out of just economic gains. Nothing else, right? And at that point of time, when if both these ideas are mobilized, which is the diplomatic and political side, but also a threshold military side, I think we will see in the long term, hopefully, if we have a cogent strategy going forward, that the Pakistan issue is going to sort of manage much better and contain much better than what we see right now.
Yeah, of course, it is contingent upon so many factors and nobody really knows how it unfolds, but then we are just trying to put together the most coherent and cogent way in which we can take it forward. And of course, this whole discussion is a part of that. But just before I let you go, Kabir, just help me understand a little bit. India has also tried to engage organizations such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, because it has a permanent structure called the RATS, the Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure. You being an expert, I think, can really convey this well to the audience, why our association or our engagement of the RATS through the SCO, etc., has not really helped us contain terrorism in the way that we wanted. And if not so, then what is the relevance of these structures?
Okay, that's a very good question, because I don't think the RAT system within the SCO is of any use to us, right? We partake in it because it is part of the SCO. So, if I remember
then who does it help before we come to
look, I don't think, it helps Pakistan predominantly at this point of time, because we have actually had counter-terror sort of exercises with Pakistan as part of RATS.
But it sounds like a joke, isn't it?
That's what I'm saying. But I think India's larger position of why it is in the SCO has nothing to do with terrorism or counter-terrorism. Of course, it pushes through it. But it is to be in an organization where China is a predominant player. And it would like to be the counter within that. So when it has sort of, it is talking about whether multipolarity or multi-alignment and so on, you have to be in these difficult positions to keep your best foot forward. And unfortunately, as part of that, RATS is a thing in SCO. So if you want to engage the other members, you can't just say that we are not going to do it because Pakistan is there. Right? But moving forward, whether we are going to do the RAT system again is going to be very, very difficult, because it comes off as a very odd program to partake in.
So de facto, it is not of much relevance. that thing is not
the
really going
counter-terror part, no.
Counter-terror part, no. All right. So, if I just sort of, ask you to give me your final takeaways on how should the broader counter-terrorism strategy from New Delhi look like in the next decade?
So, look, I think we are in a very difficult position when it comes to global counterterrorism. For a long period of time, most countries operationalized their counter-terror goals under an American security umbrella that was mobilized predominantly after 9/11.
Right.
That security umbrella is eroding and soon may not be there in the way that we have been used to.
Yeah.
But I think that's an opportunity for India. I
Okay.
think that's an opportunity for India to sort of keep its front foot forward in shaping and promoting counter-terror narratives globally, right?
Okay.
Whether it's at the United Nations, whether it's at the SCO, which is why it's good to still be in the SCO,
Yeah.
whether it's at BRICS, wherever you are, you have to put this forward with a sense of urgency to it.
Okay.
Because look, the Americans have taken, for example, a very different point of view, right?
Yeah.
They have had a meeting with Hamas also, they've just done a ceasefire kind of agreement with the Houthis, for example, all designated terror organizations, right? So they are moving into a very different viewpoint, but our geographic reality is different. We can't get up like the Americans and have Mexico and Canada as our nascent neighbors where that's not a problem.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually an opportunity for India to really take the bull by its horns as far as diplomacy is concerned, and keep this on the burner so that the world remembers that terrorism is not a trend. It's a long-term security crisis that is still very much ongoing.
Right. On that note, I have to thank you, Kabir, for taking the time out, joining us here in studio, and really unpacking a very complex issue, which is usually shrouded in conspiracy theories, panic, and a lot of misinformation. So you were watching Worldview with Swasti, and stay tuned for yet another episode.